Your system has 4 basic components: the compressor, the air hose, the electrical supply, and your airbrush gun. First thing you want to do is take your gun out of the container. Keep this. You'll need this eyedropper and this wrench in the future. But for now, you can put this aside. You'll want to take the air hose and attach this to your compressor. Your compressor has a spot on the right-hand side to attach the hose. Simply slide it on. Next, you'll take the other end of the hose and simply attach it to the gun. If you have an airbrush system from 2017, your system will have come with a moisture trap. 2018 versions do not. We found it caused more problems than it solved, so we decided to discontinue it moving forward. To attach your electrical supply, simply take this part, plug it into the back, plug the other end into the outlet, and then you'll be ready to go. Your Cookie Countess airbrush system has a handy holder for your airbrush gun right inside the compressor. The on-off switch is here, and this dial controls the air pressure. You can feel the air coming out when you start it. This is how it's supposed to work. It's not broken. The air always comes out. The color will not come out until you pull back on the lever. You can control the amount of air pressure by turning the dial. You can hear the difference in the compressor. I generally actually like to keep mine on high, and I'll take more of the control right in my lever. How much you pull back determines how much color comes out. I like to keep it on high and just pull back a little bit, and I find I get the best results that way. When you're done, turn off your machine, and you can store your gun right in the compressor. To use your airbrush gun, you're going to put your airbrush color in the well here. You always want to use a designated airbrush color. Gel colors are not formulated the same. Even if you water them down, it's still not going to be the same formulation as an airbrush color, so we don't recommend doing that. The Cookie Countess airbrush colors, all you have to do is simply use the dropper at the end and drop some drops into your well. You can fill this up pretty high without it falling out, or just add a few drops if you only have a small amount of airbrushing to do. When you begin, again, press the on button. Air is going to come out, but no color will come back till you pull back on your trigger. How much color comes out depends on how much you pull this back. You can do a little bit or a lot. I recommend doing light, even layers, and you'll get the best results on your cookies this way. When you're stenciling, it's also important to aim as far down at the stencil and or the cookie as you can. Some people choose to pull the lever with their forefinger. I actually find it more comfortable to use my thumb, but that's just me. But I do think it gives me an easier angle to aim straight down at my cookie. The farther away you are, the more spread you'll have. The closer you are, the smaller the lines and the more control. Cleaning your airbrush gun is simple. 99.9% of the time, this is all I do. If I have any color left in the well, I'll simply spray out the rest of it. And you can do this in a sink too. For the sake of the video, I'll just do it here on the counter. I actually work in a cookie decorating room that doesn't have a sink, so I use a spray bottle a lot to do this. So once I've sprayed out all the color, there's still going to be some remaining in the well. I'll just use my spray bottle and keep spraying until this comes clear. You can even dump it out too if you want to. Just protect the area below. And I'll keep doing this until there's no more color left in the well. Once this is done, you want to keep spraying until you hear that there's no liquids left in the gun. At this point, I'm going to wipe down the outside of my gun. Take a paper towel or a soft cloth and wipe down the outside of your gun. You also want to dab the front part here, as color can build up in here, and maybe wipe down the inside of the well. You can see there's still a little color left in there, so I'm going to give it a good wipe. If you think there's still too much color, add a little more water and do the spray again. As you're wiping down your gun, Be careful not to unscrew these front pieces here. Make sure these are always screwed on tight. The most important part of cleaning your gun is that you do it as soon as you're done airbrushing. If you let the color dry out in the well, that's when you'll have more difficulty cleaning it. But if you rinse it right away, it's a quick process. There's no need to take apart your gun every time you use it. In fact, I hardly ever take apart my gun, and I recommend that you really don't try because you run the risk of not putting it back together properly, or maybe dropping a piece and breaking it or losing it. It will show you how to do that, but again, it's really not necessary as long as you clean your gun out as soon as you're done every time. It's also not necessary to use anything besides water. You can use an airbrush cleaner if you want to, but water really does do the trick well enough. Probably the biggest question I have about cleaning a gun is how to get rid of a clog. Well, first let's talk about why clogs might happen. For the most part, your airbrush color should have absolutely no problem going through the Cookie Countess airbrush machine. All of our regular colors are very thin but concentrated, and these are really easy to use and you'll have no clogging issues. Any shimmers that you use are going to be a little bit thicker just based on the fact that it has tiny particles in it that give it that gorgeous shine. So you'll find these are thicker. If I keep my machine on high, I generally don't have any clogging issues at all. Other brands may be thicker, and that's when you might run into trouble. Or if you let this dry out in your airbrush machine and then you go to use it, you might find that some of those little particles were left behind. So let me show you how I like to get rid of a clog if I do have one. I should also mention that clogs can happen if you're using something that's not formulated for an airbrush gun in your airbrush machine, like a gel color or a dust that you've watered down. Those aren't all formulated to be water soluble, and those can end up clogging your machine pretty badly. If you have a clog, you usually know it because your machine will start spitting and the airflow won't be consistent. So if we had a clog, this isn't clogged, but if we had a clog, you would hear it spitting. It wouldn't sound like a normal airbrush sound. So what I recommend is I'll fill some water in here, and again, you can do this right over the sink with the faucet going into your gun. Keep spraying, keep adding water. Something else you can do is put your finger on the front of the gun and then pull back the trigger. See how it bubbles? This can kick back some items that might be in the front towards the front of the needle, and then just dump this out and keep doing this process until you find that the clog has been cleared. It's kind of like gargling for your gun. So again, just keep dumping this out. You can do this right over the sink. Just keep adding water until everything sounds like it's running smooth again. If that doesn't work, something else you can do is you can unscrew these front pieces here. You can take off both of these in the same piece or one at a time. Be careful to put these aside neatly and don't lose them. You're going to unscrew the handle, and you're going to loosen up the chucking nut here that holds the needle in place. When you pull this needle back, and you can see from the front here it came back, then you can put your gun under a hard running faucet, and the water pressure will push the water out towards the front of the gun, bypassing the needle, and kick out anything else that might be left in there. To reassemble, you're just going to push your needle back in. Make sure it's all the way forward. Don't press too hard, but make sure it's all the way forward. Tighten your chucking nut. Put the handle back on. Put the needle cover on. The nozzle cover. And then the needle cap. Whoops, this way. And then you should be all set to go again. So you really don't need to take apart your gun to clean it. If you do feel the need to do this, let me show you how to take it apart and reassemble it. You can also do just kind of a half cleaning, and you really don't need to take apart this back part. I just want to point out that the color really is only in this part, and the color is the only thing that's going to clog the machine. So let me show you how you can kind of just clean the front part of your gun. I'm going to take this hose off just so it's not in the way here. You can leave it on or you can take it off when you're ready to do it. First, we're going to unscrew the needle cap and the nozzle cap. Make sure you're working on a surface that maybe on a tray that's going to catch these pieces if they were to roll. Maybe something light like a paper towel where you can see where you're going with all these pieces. Then you want to unscrew the handle back here. Loosen up the chucking nut here. And pull your needle back just a little bit. You don't have to pull it back all the way. So the next thing we're going to need to do is take off the nozzle. You're going to want to use the wrench that came with your machine. And this is the most delicate part of your airbrush gun, so you want to be really careful doing this. This is a very small piece with very small threads. If you strip these threads or break this piece, especially if you strip the threads, your gun's kind of toast at that point, so you do want to be careful with this. Have the butt end of the gun facing you. Put your wrench on the nozzle and then push down to unscrew. Once you have it loosened, I recommend holding the nozzle in your hand and then turn the gun so that way when the nozzle comes off, you have it in your fingers and it doesn't just fall off from the wrench. The chucking nut is here. So now we're going to push the needle forward, and any color that might be on the needle will just stay in the front part of the gun. See that? Now what we can do is from here, we can just run some water through the front of this. You can rinse these pieces really well, soak them for a little bit in water. All these pieces back here, you really don't have to take apart to do a full cleaning. No color is getting back here. And also these pieces are lubricated by the factory, so you kind of don't want to strip away those lubricants. I am going to show you how to take it apart and put it back together in case you have done this already, or you really do feel the need to do it because you think there's something going on with the gun that might be attributed to how it's put together. So from here, this piece on this back will unscrew. And this might take a little while. This is a pretty big screw. Inside here, you're gonna find a spring and another piece that is attached to the lever guide. So here's our spring. Here's the piece we just unscrewed. And here's this piece here with the lever guide attached. On airbrush machines from 2017, you'll find that this piece is a little bit different and this lever guide is not attached. So refer to my older video on how to take apart and reassemble that gun. From here, you can pull this piece out. And if you want to, you can take apart this piece down here. And that's as far as you can go. Everything else stays together. So to reassemble, just go in reverse. This here. The lever guide has a piece on here that's on a hinge. This round piece here needs to fit in this hole. Unfortunately, it is possible to actually assemble your gun with this piece bent and not in the hole and think you're assembled, but then your gun won't work. So if you ever have everything where you think your gun is assembled and the air turns on, but the air is not coming out the front of the gun at all, it's just kicking back up the middle, that means that this little piece isn't in there. So you just want to look down through this hole, place this in here. These little threads should be towards the back of the machine. Those give you a little traction when you're putting your finger on there. And you'll be able to hear this kind of click into place. If you feel like you can't see it great, you can leave this part off first, whoops, and then you'll be able to see through to that hole easier. Let's see, turn this in the right direction, and we'll get this in there. Be careful once you have this in that you don't flip over the gun, because the needle is what actually holds this in place. And if the needle is not in, it can fall out. Did I get it? You can look through the bottom to see if you got it in. All right, there it is. And you can even hear that it snapped a little bit. So again, don't tip this over. So I'm just gonna kind of leave my finger on here and put this bottom piece back on. Okay, once that's done, take this piece here. See how this little scoop has kind of a handle at the top? That's gonna go in and up, and this is gonna press up against your operating lever. Next it goes on the spring, and then this piece here with the big screw, and that end goes in first. And keep screwing this until it doesn't go anymore. And this is what's putting tension on the operating lever or the trigger, whatever you want to call it. I tend to call it the trigger. All right, so once that's in all the way, you can feel that there's pressure on here. This part should move back with it when you pull this back. Next, we're gonna wanna move towards the front for a second and reattach the nozzle. So grab that nozzle between your fingers. And again, use your gun to turn, not the nozzle. It'll just make it easier for you. Oops. There we go. Once that's on, you can use your wrench and go in the opposite direction, so go up. But again, just turn this just until you feel resistance. Do not press hard on this. Okay, once you feel resistance, stop. I can't emphasize that enough. Now we can take our needle, make sure it's dry. I'm gonna give this a little wipe. And we'll go in from the back end here and push forward. And you wanna make sure this is pushed forward until you can't push it anymore. Don't jam it in there, but make sure it's all the way forward. Next, put the chucking nut back on. Now go to the nozzle cap. Be careful you don't stab yourself with the needle. And now the needle cap. And last but not least is the handle. And then you can reattach your air hose and you're ready to go. If you ever have an instance where your gun is turned on and there's a tiny little bit of color coming out before you're pulling back the trigger, what's causing that is that your needle is not all the way forward. So you're gonna wanna unscrew the handle, loosen this chucking nut, and make sure that you didn't have the needle just back a little bit and then this tightened, because it'll still seem like it's working right, but the color will be leaking out. So make sure this is all the way forward. And now tighten this. If you also ever have an instance where the airflow seems really weak or there's a little bit of spitting going on, you're gonna wanna make sure, like I said in the beginning, that this part here is tightened. This is the last piece that stops the air from coming out of the gun and redirects everything towards that needle. So if this isn't tightened all the way, it's gonna cause the air pressure to not be as strong. It might spit a little bit, and you're gonna wanna make sure that this is tightened. When you clean your gun, if you tend to kind of wipe that end down by going back and forth, you might accidentally be loosening that, so make sure that's tightened after each use. Also, if this is loose, you'll be able to hear the difference in the compressor. So this is loose. When we tighten it, you'll hear the sound change. And now we have full pressure. But if this is loose at all, there's not going to be as much pressure coming out the front. So just check on that every time you start. And that's really it with your airbrush gun. It's really easy to use. When you first get it, I recommend throwing a little color in there, get some paper towels out, and just start playing with it and get a feel for what happens when you stay close to it, what happens when you pull further away, when you pull back hard on it, what happens. Play with the air pressure. So just have some fun with it. Don't be afraid to experiment. This is a great way to get to know your gun. You can practice cleaning it as well. So in some other videos, I'll give you tips on how to use it when stenciling. But for now, you are ready to get started.